Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathaniel. I particularly love movies, and I want to share that with you. From the horrifying to the terrifying, the spine-chilling to the hair-raising, along with the straight-up disgusting. WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around, and we'll leave you with a movie that will make your blood run cold.
88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. And for tonight's episode, in order to keep up the theme of this being October and kind of contributing to the build-up to Halloween at the end of the month, talking about horror movies, I thought tonight we'd talk about something really scary. We're going to be talking about serial killers. No, we're not going to be talking about real serial killers. We're going to be talking about the most famous fictional serial killer of all time, and by far his most famous film appearance. You may have a guess as to who I'm talking about. Tonight we're going to be talking about movies that concern the fictional serial killer Hannibal the Cannibal, otherwise known as Hannibal Lecter, when he is portrayed by Anthony Hopkins in, again, his most famous film appearance, being the first movie on our watch list tonight, The Silence of the Lambs from 1991, followed up by Hannibal from 2001, and ending out the night with Red Dragon from 2002. Usually here on What to Watch Wednesdays, I like to kind of fluff things up, especially when it's time for horror movies. I like to have fun and kind of go for it and fluff things around. Tonight, I'm not going to be doing that. We're going to kind of get straight to the point and get kind of blunt with it, because these movies do not mess around with your emotions, even remotely, which we'll see very soon. But I wanted to just give kind of a blanket statement about these movies. Personally, I enjoy these movies somewhat to the degree that you can, but I do want to give the content warning to anybody who's never seen, especially the first Silence of the Lambs movie. If you've never seen it before and you're not sure if you're up for it, I would not recommend it. So I'm going to give that blanket statement of kind of an asterisk over everything I'm about to say tonight. And with that being said, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we will jump into The Silence of the Lambs. So stick around. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Silence of the Lambs from 1991, available to watch now on HBO Max. For the basic plot summary of The Silence of the Lambs, we follow FBI agent Clarice Starling, as she is tasked with finding the serial killer Buffalo Bill. In order to do this, Clarice Starling must now consult with another serial killer that they have locked up somewhere in a mental institution. This serial killer is known as Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter. And boy howdy, do things go off the rails from there, if you can imagine. Actually, you may not have to imagine, because, quite honestly, The Silence of the Lambs is extremely famous. And you've probably heard of it before. You've seen it referenced many times over. And you're probably familiar with the basic plot summary. I kind of was able to just do it from memory without having to really look at what is put out there to just describe it to you. It's that iconic in my brain, and it's that iconic for a lot of people, I'm very sure. Why is that? Well, I mean, first off, it's a great movie. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, because everybody's heard of The Silence of the Lambs. It's not something that everybody's heard of because it's awful. Well, that could be a possibility, but let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the fact that people have heard of this movie, not just because it is a well-made and well-constructed movie, but they've heard of it for a very specific reason. And it's something that I mentioned at the very beginning of the show. That being Hannibal Lecter. Not just Hannibal Lecter, the character, but the actor who played Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs from 1991. Anthony Hopkins has been glorified and immortalized as the character of Hannibal Lecter for the last, about 34 years? I can do math, right? Yes, I can do math. It's 2025. This movie came out in 1991. That's 34 years, and if it's incorrect, oopsie doopsies, doesn't matter. Anthony Hopkins has been immortalized as Hannibal Lecter for quite some time now, ever since this movie came out. And there's a good reason for it, partially because it is a bang-up performance, and he does a really good job at being uncomfortable and psychotic. However, there is one element to Anthony Hopkins' performance that I think gets looked over way too often. There's one other element that makes Hannibal Lecter work, and it's something that I am burning to talk about, so I'm just going to blurt it out right now. Yes, Anthony Hopkins is good, but can we give Jodie Foster some credit here? Can we give her, like, a lot more credit? No, I mean, could we give her maybe most of the credit, actually? Could we give her, like, the same exact amount of credit that we've been giving Anthony Hopkins for the last few years to Jodie Foster as well? Could we, like, immortalize her too? Please? 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 Could we do that? I would be so happy if we did that, because let me tell you, after watching this movie for the second time to get ready for this show, I was realizing, man, Jodie Foster just does a good job playing the character of Clarice Starling. She is empathetic, she's interesting, she's very self-assured, she's very confident, and has to deal with a lot of garbage thrown in her direction, to the point where it's like, I respect this character more than Hannibal Lecter, which is good because Hannibal Lecter is a serial killer who eats his victims. But he has been immortalized because of Anthony Hopkins' performance. People tend to romanticize him. And I think we should kind of spend more time understanding, man, Clarice Starling had some serious gall to be able to go up head-to-head with Hannibal Lecter and kind of lose against him for so long over the course of the movie. And Jodie Foster portrays that action so perfectly that I think it gets overlooked. It's all in the dynamic between the two of them. It's kind of the core of the movie. Part of what makes Silence of the Lambs so interesting to me is it's got two things that it does really well. The first is the fact that it is a master of show, don't tell. Pretty much all the garbage that is thrown at Clarice is implied rather than stated outright, which is good. That is what it's supposed to be. It's good at establishing that. It is also very good at establishing how dangerous Hannibal Lecter truly is without ever showing it directly until specific moments. It keeps you on your toes and keeps him unpredictable, especially during that initial interaction, which is good, once again. That's kind of one big element that it does really well, that I feel like is out of order in my notes to the point I'm trying to get to, which is that on top of Hannibal Lecter being a well-established character, he also has to compete with the other serial killer that I mentioned, that being Buffalo Bill. And there isn't a competition. Hannibal Lecter wins, but it's interesting, to me at least, how this movie is famous for having Hannibal Lecter, and people tend to forget that it kind of has more of a main villain in the sense of Buffalo Bill. Here's how I'm going to describe it. I'm going to describe it like this. The Silence of the Lambs has two villains in its story. It has the active serial killer in that of Buffalo Bill, who is kidnapping people. And it has another villain in the form of the incarcerated Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter is the antagonist of the story. He is the one who holds all the information. He's the person that Clarice must consult with to capture Buffalo Bill. And because Clarice Starling is the protagonist of The Silence of the Lambs, she has the most direct dynamic with Hannibal Lecter. And so, keep in mind, in order to have a good story, you need to have a good dynamic between your protagonist and your antagonist. And because Anthony Hopkins does such a good job as the antagonist, we have to expect that Jodie Foster does a good job as the protagonist. And because we expect that, we are not disappointed at all. Do you see what I'm saying? Jodie Foster does such a good job as the protagonist because she has to. She's going up against one of the most well-established antagonists in all of cinema, in that of Hannibal Lecter. So because it's got this interesting dynamic, we just really have to expect a lot from it. And boy, does the movie deliver on it. I feel like I am getting to my point. I'm just kind of adding in some fluff here and there. So I'll cut it down to my final thought on The Silence of the Lambs. It's something that I feel like I have to emphasize before we go to break. This movie, rewatching it, was probably the most paralyzing horror experience I have gotten in a very long time. Psychologically, The Silence of the Lambs gets in your head unlike anything I think I've experienced, except for specific examples like Oldboy or Requiem for a Dream. Those two movies get in my head a lot more, and they are more psychologically distressing to me than The Silence of the Lambs. But The Silence of the Lambs is truly a psychological horror experience to me. I think it is one of the most distilled and pure psychological horror experiences I have had, and I will not give that title to any movie out there. I do not reserve that for a lot of other movies. And it's special that Silence of the Lambs has earned it. Again, paralyzing. Truly paralyzing. With all that being said, there's not much more to say on The Silence of the Lambs. But there sure is a lot to say on the sequel, that being Hannibal. So stick around for that. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Hannibal from 2001, available to watch now on HBO Max. For the basic plot summary of Hannibal, we follow Clarice Starling from the first movie, Silence of the Lambs, as she must now track down the escaped Hannibal Lecter and apprehend him before he is killed off by Mason Verger, the only victim of Hannibal Lecter to still be alive. He's still technically a victim, but he's alive, you know? He survived being attacked by Hannibal Lecter, so good for him, I guess. I guess I can guess about a lot of things. You know what I can't guess about? What on earth this movie is. I'm gonna cut straight to the chase. I was horrendously confused watching Hannibal. I kind of have to blurt this out now. Hannibal is probably the most confusing sequel I've seen in a very long time. And it is nearly fascinating how confusing it feels to watch. Emotionally, I was just kind of numb inside watching it. It certainly wasn't like the experience of watching Blade from last week, where Blade 3 was badly made, and so it confused me how far it fell. This one is just so middle of the road that in comparison to Silence of the Lambs, I'm just kind of confused as to where did we go with this? How did we end up here of all places? I think I'm almost confusing you guys by talking about it like this, so I'm going to narrow it down a little bit more. Here's one thing I'd really got to get off my chest. Confusingly, they decided, okay, Jodie Foster is not going to be in this movie as Clarice Starling. Now, I have looked into it a little bit. It seems like she chose not to come back. Okay, fine. I'm not confused by that. It seems like she did not want to come back after reading the script. Okay, fair enough. So instead they casted Julianne Moore as Clarice Starling for this movie. And I'm not confused at them casting Julianne Moore. What I'm confused by is, why isn't Julianne Moore talented enough? That sounds so mean to say, but I think I'll phrase it in a nicer way. Why is Julianne Moore not as talented as Jodie Foster? Quite simply, why is she just not as good? Oh, I know, she's just not as good. I don't even need a why. I think my opinion is that she's not as good. And I can narrow down why. She doesn't show enough emotional range. She doesn't sound good with the accent that Jodie Foster had. She's not good at holding close-ups like Jodie Foster. She has no chemistry with Anthony Hopkins, even remotely. She overdoes everything or underdoes everything. Quite frankly, she's just not as good of an actress as Jodie Foster, which is my opinion. But it's my opinion and it's my show, so there. I'm so confused as to like how they decided to go with Julianne Moore as the replacement for Jodie Foster. I think somebody else should have been the replacement. That's my opinion, but somebody else should have been the replacement. At the very least, they still had Anthony Hopkins, so that kind of saves the movie, but kind of not. I'm still very confused by the movie because not only did they replace Jodie Foster, they also completely replaced the tone and the feeling of the first movie and worked off of a story that did not have the same merits as the original Silence of the Lambs, even remotely. I think part of the issue is that Hannibal at some points feels like it's being filmed as if it were an action movie rather than a horror movie or a psychological thriller. And then when it is being filmed like a psychological thriller, it feels like a badly constructed one, again, in my opinion, but it's not a very well-constructed psychological thriller. And when it feels like an action movie, it's way too frantic to be exciting. And when it's like a detective movie, you know what the detective movie side of Hannibal is? It's Clarice Starling sitting in a basement like half the time, while we follow this random French detective in France, walking around France, and trying to find Hannibal Lecter. And it's like, we haven't spent any time with you, and I feel like I don't want to spend any more time with you. Why are you still here? Why are we following you? I didn't even bother writing down his name. I didn't care. I really didn't care about him at all. Not like Clarice. And I cared about her. And then they ruined her by recasting her. So, like, worst of both worlds, if you ask me. Let's see here. What else did this movie have problems with? Oh, yeah. So you know how I kind of briefly mentioned that the first movie was really good at showing and not telling? And then sometimes, if you were lucky, it wouldn't even tell you. Sometimes it would rely on your imagination. And or it would keep a good reveal up until the last minute. And then there was all that talk of how Clarice had to deal with garbage being thrown at her. That was in response to the fact that her workplace was full of men and she works for the FBI. And so she is kind of focused on as an object rather than as a person. Yes? We're tracking? Good. Okay. Let me tell you that when it comes to those values specifically, Hannibal does a really good job in its first 25 minutes of dismantling and disavowing everything that the first Silence of the Lambs movie did to show you that rather than tell you outright. You know, it kind of removed all the subtlety and just pushed it directly in your face in a way that really bothered me. I can't even get into some of the workplace stuff because it's very inappropriate, but just keep in mind it's pretty much directly spelled out for you. When in the first movie, it did such a good job at just subtly hinting at it to the point where it was in your face, but you had to still be watching the movie. In this case, it's like you don't even have to be watching the movie even all that intently to notice it. And that's where it gets really annoying because it's just in your face now and you have to deal with it. I hope I'm making sense. I hope I'm making sense. But at the same time, the movie didn't make sense to me. So if I'm not making sense, I think it's better that I not make sense so that you can understand what it's like watching Hannibal. I think the biggest thing I'm going to hone in on is the casting change was not appreciated, and a lot of the cast choices were just weird. We had Gary Oldman, who is, again, Mason Verger, who I mentioned at the beginning, which feels like 4 years ago, because that's what it felt like watching Hannibal. It felt like I was watching a movie that lasted way too long for its own good, but wasn't boring enough for me to turn off. Not Hannibal, wow. I'm getting confused even. Hannibal's only surviving victim, that being Mason Verger, is played by Gary Oldman, and he is a little shriveled up, I don't even know how to describe it, meatwad. We'll just say he's a meatwad who's just bedridden half the time. And it's like, okay, sure, Gary Oldman's doing a good job, I guess, of being a meatwad. There's not much emotional attachment to a meatwad. Why are we spending so much time with him? And then you just got like Ray Liotta in the movie. And it's like, okay, Ray Liotta's here. Okay, cool. Bring back Jodie Foster. I don't like Julianne Moore. That's my opinion of Hannibal. That's the biggest thing they got wrong, in my opinion. Have I covered my bases? Cool. Good. My opinion, Hannibal is dumb. Not worth watching. Cool. Okay. I know that has been negative and all over the place, but I can promise you this, when we come back from the break, I will be honed in a lot more on our next movie, Red Dragon. So stick around for that. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Red Dragon from 2002, available to watch now on Netflix or to rent from places such as Amazon, YouTube, and Fandango at home. For the basic plot summary of Red Dragon, the movie is set as a prequel to The Silence of the Lambs, where we follow ex-FBI agent Will Graham as he must track down the serial killer, the Tooth Fairy, with the help of Hannibal Lecter, who, keep in mind, Will Graham had recently incarcerated. So they have a really good dynamic and they're very close friends. You know what I mean? I don't think Hannibal has any ill will towards Will Graham, even remotely, and is not angry at him at all. Anyways, so let's blurt this out of the way right now. Blurt this out of the way. Yes, very, very tactile way of saying that, but it doesn't matter. Here's the important point. Let me tell you that I live for this kind of movie. What kind of movie is that? Why, the underrated movie. The movie that people don't talk about as often. The ones that you just don't hear that much about, and maybe you hear, oh, it's part of a series of movies. Maybe it's not that good. I don't really need to watch that one. It feels like they're just tacking on to the original. They're just trying to steal the thunder of the original Silence of the Lambs, which is amazing for Anthony Hopkins' performance in it. And my response to that is no. Silence! That is not the case with Red Dragon, let me tell you. Red Dragon is, in my opinion, actually quite underrated. It is actually quite good. Very good, in fact. That's just my opinion, but I did not expect to enjoy or get as much of the same experience out of this movie that I got out of Silence of the Lambs. I was going in expecting, oh, it's at least going to be better than Hannibal. Anything's going to be better than Hannibal at this point. Let me tell you, the surprise that I felt going, wow, this is like bordering on being as good as The Silence of the Lambs was not what I was expecting to feel. In certain instances, Red Dragon is almost as good as The Silence of the Lambs for so many reasons. Where to start? Well, let's focus in on the fact that this movie does not have Clarice Starling in it. But because from the original source material it didn't have Clarice Starling in it, I can excuse it. And because it is written in mind with a different character to Clarice, I don't have to complain about it not having Jodie Foster in it. And I can instead focus on the fact that Will Graham is played by Edward Norton, who is no Jodie Foster. I can still complain about it a little bit, watch me. But I can admit Edward Norton does a good job. And what helps that job be accomplished is the fact that his dynamic with Hannibal is completely different from the dynamic that Hannibal has with Clarice. And because of that, the experience of watching the two interact is a very different experience. When I say the two, I mean it from the perspective of watching Hannibal and I almost said Edward Graham. That's how kind of, I don't remember that his name is Will Graham. I thought it was Edward Graham because it's Edward Norton. Doesn't matter. The experience of watching Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter interact is very different from watching Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter interact. To the point where I'm actually interested to see the side of Will Graham. I'm interested to see the side where he just doesn't really put up with Hannibal Lecter's cryptic nonsense and takes it at face value, but still kind of lets Hannibal get in his head a little bit. That's the part that I find very interesting to see play out on the screen. I will also say that on top of Edward Norton, the cast of this movie is a much more packed with heavy hitters and a lot more fleshed out in terms of a core group. You have Edward Norton, you have Ralph Fiennes playing the Tooth Fairy, the serial killer that they are tasked of finding and hunting down in this movie. You have Emily Watson as Will Graham's wife. We have Harvey Keitel as his boss. And we have Philip Seymour Hoffman as a very annoying journalist. And, I mean, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman playing an annoying journalist. If you're not familiar with Philip Seymour Hoffman at all, that's completely understandable why you don't understand why that's a good choice. But if you know who Philip Seymour Hoffman is, you know exactly why he's such a good choice to play an annoying journalist. But he's not even the best part. One thing I didn't mention with the original Silence of the Lambs is the fact that I still enjoyed the performance of the actor who played Buffalo Bill. And I still enjoyed the character of Buffalo Bill to an extent. He pales in comparison to the Tooth Fairy played by Ralph Fiennes in this movie. Goodness me. Ralph Fiennes does a bang-up job to the point that he is a better villain. He is a much better villain. He's a better overall antagonist. He's a much more interesting character. We spend a lot more time with him. He is better than Buffalo Bill. I will say it. That is my opinion, but I will say it loud and proud. He is a better villain than Buffalo Bill. And Buffalo Bill was already pretty good. So imagine my surprise to say, no, I think that the Tooth Fairy is a much better villain. There's so many more interesting things to him. There's so many more. Or at least in my opinion. And maybe not more, but it was just such a visceral experience watching it. And part of that was helped by the fact that we spent so much more time with him than we did with Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. So maybe it's not that there is more there, it's just that we spend more time with him. Keep that all in mind, and also understand that this movie has some really good visual qualities to it. Some of the color palette choices are great. Some of the cinematography is amazing. But it's also mixed with such chunky and beautifully bombastic sound quality and sound design and music done by Danny Elfman to the point where it quite literally just tickles my brain watching it. I can't describe it in any other way than tickles my brain. It just sounds so good and it backs up the image so beautifully that it's such high quality that I just, such a visceral experience that really added to how thrilling and intense this movie was at certain points. I just really enjoyed a lot of sections of this movie, especially the last 20 minutes. Hoo boy! If you thought the ending to Silence of the Lambs was good, you will get a kick out of this ending. I thought the ending to Silence of the Lambs was good. This one is on another level. Here's the ending point with Red Dragon. Again, it's the kind of thing I live for, and I'm sure you can understand. I liked this movie a lot. I could admit it's not as good as Silence of the Lambs. I can admit it's not even perfect. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect. It may have some issues here and there. But goodness me, I would be lying if I said I didn't feel like, by the end of it, I got an experience that was, once again, bordering on being as good as the original Silence of the Lambs. I cannot recommend Red Dragon to people enough who have seen Silence of the Lambs. If you saw Silence of the Lambs and you know you're able to put up with the type of things it throws at you, you should watch Red Dragon, in my opinion. You would probably enjoy it to the same level that you enjoyed Silence of the Lambs. With all that being said, thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. If you want to follow along with the show, please follow along on Instagram and YouTube at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. When it comes to my broadcasting here on 88.1 The Burg, I will be on this Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m. for What to Watch Weekends, where we will dive into these movies a little bit more, although we shall see how much further I can dive into them. But we will also try to dive into the movie Hannibal Rising, so that should be interesting to see. Again, I will be back next week on Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here at 88.1 The Burg for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays. And I'll see you all then, where I'll be telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.